So let's do it. So yeah, you asked me. We were distracted by. We had another conversation, so we weren't distracted. It's why we're here.
Of course.
So let's do it again.
Cool. So yeah, you mentioned something a lot in your podcast interviews that something is rationally derivable.
Right.
Usually morals or certain values.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So that's the moral and the value part is super controversial, but I'll lay since we have time here. Yeah, that's right in the middle. Since we have to, you notice when people were positive, they also hit it off the scale.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
I used to have one that's vertical.
Yeah.
So it was like at the bottom is 0, at the top is 100.
And
people would go right to 100, but I was thinking like up is good, down
yeah,
is
that's
bad.
true. So this
now it's like
obviates that. Yeah.
to the more extreme might be bad. Like I don't know. It's I don't know what to do.
Anyway, so rationally drivable. So let's construct the building blocks of this, the fundamentals. So if there's a kind of instrumental idea to that, so if something is rationally derivable, in morality, it's a moral principle that you can figure out through reason. But there are also rationally derivable physical phenomena that you can figure out, like the fact that we have anything, like eyeglasses, using a basic example, or lens technology more broadly. The fact that we have those means that we can, like reason is instrumental, you can use reason to solve a problem or to figure out what you want to do. So then the question becomes, so sorry about that. So then the question becomes, it only beeps for emergency people.
Okay.
I'm gonna make sure my sound's okay. So then the question becomes, which I think is really interesting, are there such a thing as moral facts? And if you say there are moral facts, then the thing is, well, how do you know there are moral facts, and what would those moral facts be?
Yeah.
Now, you can say that there are no moral facts, and if there are no moral facts, then the whole concept of being rationally derivable is irrelevant, because there are no moral facts. So you can't rationally derive. It doesn't even make sense, right? So then the question is, what tool set could you use to figure something out? Well, here's a quick way to think about it. When you try to figure out something you want to do, like if you want to figure out, what's a good way to make a timer for 5 minutes? People get stuck in modes of thinking like, we need to have the glass of this weight. It means, empirically test, X, this weight of the sand or whatever. But instead of doing that, it's super helpful to think, how should we not do this? So how we should not do this is bring a water buffalo in here. I mean, there are an almost infinite number of ways in which we cannot do this, but very few ways in which we can do this. But the moment you admit that there are certain ways that you are bad, that must mean that there are ways that are better. So let's take a look at morality then. If I say, well, why don't we just go around chopping people up with machetes, and someone could say, you could say anything. You could say, well, it's convention, it's custom,
culture,
it's culture, it's it's in my holy book, it's in you should. So I don't accept the premise of that question. So then it depends on what someone says, but I'll give you the lens. I really like John Rawls for that, because he talks about not knowing your place in a social system, and then being behind a veil of ignorance, and then figuring out what's true, that you can rationally derive your moral life. And you don't need God to do that. You don't need anything.
So we rationally derive it through a veil of ignorance.
That's correct.
Yet, how do we determine the results of this veil of ignorance thought experiment is like rational?
Well, he says that it should be, reason is univocal. In other words, anybody who does a thought experiment should be able to come to the conclusion. And I've probably done it with like literally 20,000 students, and I would say that I've had, can't think of a single standout I've had, like, so that we should have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. But the people who would argue against those things would already be situated in some kind of a monarchical episcopate, to borrow that phrase. Yeah, like they'd already know, like they'd be slave owners, or there'd be something like that.
Yeah. So if we have like moral thought experiment X through the veil of ignorance, everyone on the planet comes to like one decision, but one person does not, does that make it a moral fact?
Well, that's the thing. That's the question. Hold that thought. You want to have a conversation?
Yeah.
No, I was just.
You're certainly welcome.
I've seen you in the park before. This is a great setup that you have.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
cool.
you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it. Just listening.
Thanks, man. You're welcome to listen all you want.
Yep.
Take a card, listen away. Sure. Yeah, you bet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing. First of all, what would be the reason that someone would go through the thought experiment and condone slavery? Let's run these down. So let's say you're sitting in this thought experiment and you're like, well, it would really suck to be a slave owner, right? I mean, to be a slave, yeah. But it'd be great to be a slave owner, and I'm willing to take that risk. Because worst comes to worst, I just find a building. If I live in a society with buildings, if not, I can just hang myself, and I won't have to
The
deal
veil
with
of ignorance experiment is like if you were not in a world, but then if, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you go into this world, you might have a chance of being
it.
one of the
So
others.
what if someone says, you know what, I'm willing to accept that risk,
Okay.
and they do that with full faculties, clarity of thought, they've thought through it, etc. Well, the problem with that is, as Nietzsche would say, you can't risk or bet unless you know the odds. Every gambler, especially like serious gamblers, know the odds for. I mean, I don't know the odds. I don't gamble, but I know you're more likely to lose than win. But that wouldn't be rational if you didn't know the odds. Because you're not going to be like, well, you could be, black, or it could be racial, it could be gender, it could be, but if you don't know like, I bet you if you were to say, well, all Samoans, people are like, well, yeah, what are the likelihood that I'll be Samoans, even if you thought that it was worth the risk. But if you start talking gender, where it's 50-50, or biological sex, so if you want to frame it, it's 50-50, a person who sees things clearly will change their mind quite quickly. But you don't even know those odds.
Okay, so you need to know the odds in order to rationally make a bet?
No, you would need to know the odds in order to morally justify, if it's at all morally justifiable. I mean, you would need to know the odds to take a moral risk, assuming that you don't buy into the moral system to begin with.
Okay. What if the odds like 51-49?
But that's the thing, you don't know the odds.
You don't know it.
So if you don't know the odds, why would you take the risk?
So what do we then?
What we then
happen?
conclude from that is that in the system of justice, it's rationally drivable that you ought not to have slavery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So just through reasoned thought experiments, we can rationally derive certain values that way? That's one example way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can give you an argument against that, but that's my current view.
Okay. All right.
Two things on that. So I was in discussion with another university to teach there, and this is oddly enough a religious university, but they wanted me to sign a statement of faith. Was I telling you this?
They wanted you to sign it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. And I told them the truth is not only could I not sign it because it would be, to say the least, untrue, but even if you asked me to sign a statement of non-faith, I couldn't sign it.
Yeah.
Because I have to be open to the idea that even though it hasn't happened in thousands of 2,000 years, excuse me, that someone could come along, for example, with an argument for the existence of God, and be like, wow, that's just ironclad. Like, I never thought about that. It's just, like, I am compelled as a rational person to change my mind.
If like a university made you sign a statement that bananas are yellow, like, wouldn't that just be the same thing?
Well, bananas are yellow is an empirical phenomenon, and I don't know anybody arguing against it. I mean, there's no debates that go on that bananas are yellow.
Yeah.
But there are debates for the existence of God. Now, that could be just because people are making shit up and they want to make it seem like there's a debate, like the tobacco industry, as I wrote in the foreword for Lindsay's book. But I don't know. If someone wanted me to sign a piece of paper that said most bananas are yellow, I would have no problem signing that.
Okay. So there's a difference there.
Well, yeah, and also provided that if tomorrow some kind of plague came out that said, well, look, this now bananas were yellow at, time t, but, time t2, there's some, I don't know,
Just
virus
wipe-
or
you know,
something.
just
Now
wipes
they're,
out
now
all
they're
the yellow
just,
bananas.
red.
Yeah.
Well, then what I thought was true at that time would have to be, was now
So
revised.
you'd either have to resign or
That's
fix
correct.
that
Yeah, if they're
statement?
running around still thinking bananas are yellow.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that about again?
Morality.
What were we talking about? Yeah.
Well, I was talking about how it's really important to part of morality is that it's rationally drivable, and the other part is you just have to be open enough, like to say, oh, well, here's an argument for slavery. Like you can't have. I think the slavery thing is a great example because I don't know any good arguments. I think it's pretty much done. I think we've solved that problem. Now the question is, at what point are we willing to not reconsider moral phenomenon in the way that we're not willing to reconsider empirical phenomenon?
It seems like just as true that bananas are yellow and slavery is bad. Is that what would you say that?
Yeah, I have the same degree of confidence
yeah.
that most bananas are yellow as I do. I actually have more confidence that slavery is wrong than I do than most bananas are yellow.
Yeah.
Far more confidence, because there could be some host of bananas in some weird place that's overpopulated with pink bananas or
Like a
something.
Fort Knox of green bananas
Yeah,
that are just perpetually
I can say
ripe.
it's kind of like the induction in the black swan thing. I can certainly say in my life, most bananas I've seen, if not all bananas, there's some bananas that have been brown because they're rotten. But so I would say I'm more confident that slavery is morally wrong than I are that most bananas in this. So you have to define it again.
Most ripe bananas.
Yeah, most bananas, in this, within my lifetime are
Yeah.
yellow. But what's interesting about that, and I want to stop thinking about that was going through my head, was we've created an atmosphere in which we can't wonder aloud about things. And so it's going through my head, it'd be like, because I was really kind of thinking through that. And then I'm sure that we played over like 1,000 times, like, look at this, he wondered about something. I saw this Jordan Peterson clip where this guy presented him with an argument, and he started thinking about it.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not different. Maybe I was wrong about that.
And then all these people dogpiled him, like, why is
On
he...
Jim Jeffries, he just changed his mind. Yeah.
Yeah, like, why are these people... And I thought to myself, I saw another one with Barry Weiss, and someone did an analysis of her on the Rogan show, like, she said, I'm not sure if I used that word correctly.
I think that I used that word correctly. Jamie, can you check what toady means?
And these people went fucking crazy. Like, well, maybe... So you want to create a culture in which someone says, geez, I'm not sure I use that word correctly. I need to look that up. Like, that's all of a sudden, like, is that your gotcha? Because if that's your gotcha, man, that tells you that you really need to start rethinking what it means to be a good person and how to treat people with decency.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So that's what I mean by rationally drivable. What do you think?
gotcha. I like it. I think it relates to liberal science, Rausch's
Yeah,
no final
that's right.
say. It's like the result of public criticism is our knowledge, regardless if it's empirical or just purely philosophical. As long as we're doing this process, that's knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. And the things that are obvious, like slavery, is probably the most obvious. But then the question is, what about those issues? What about those issues that are less obvious that give you pause? Like maybe some of the things on those, maybe some of the questions that we have today. And are there certain things, so this school of morality called Deontology, it's like, rights, responsibilities, duties, things you ought to do that, I've often, so within this system, many people call it a Kantian system, this idea that I just think it's complicated. So these systems are built upon transparency, whereas utilitarianism is not built on transparency. There's a great little book Utilitarianism for and against. It came out a little while ago, but it's just the clearest. It's a little book, but it's just the clearest example of utilitarianism, different types of utilitarianism. But there's no necessity for transparency in utilitarianism like there is in deontology.
What do you mean by transparency?
Well, that like in a deontological moral system, everybody needs to know what the rules are. There's no like secret moral rules. Like everybody needs to know them at every level.
Okay.
And
In order to have the duty.
yeah,
Okay.
and because they're rationally drivable, and Rawls claims that the principles that come out of his position are rationally drivable. I personally think he's right, but I'm open to arguments against that. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Sweet. It's a deep subject.
Yeah, it is. And this idea then that somehow, and Harris got in trouble for talking to Charles Murray about it, et cetera, that there are certain types of knowledge that we just, if true, it would be devastating to the society. Like it would rip apart the fabric of society. And that's a consequentialist argument, right? And the example I gave you, I don't know, should I say my steel man? I've never heard it before. Wasn't I talking to you about that?
I don't know.
So my sincere belief is, the older I get, the more raw I can be. I honestly think, have you noticed like everybody who sat down at this table, I think the type of people who are going to sit down to answer those questions are already going to be on one side of the issue, and that they're just simply not going to say, yes, trans women should be allowed in women's sports. You're just not going to. I just don't think we're going to get anybody who's going to say that. And I think that there's a cultural mindset that goes along with not wanting to have that conversation. Either that, or they're so dishonest with themselves that they just have a glimmer of understanding that if they were to try to engage that issue,
Yeah. I've had a few people on the opposite side sit down, but maybe just people don't know about the issue in general. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, the idea that there should be, so the steel man of the forbidden knowledge is, let's say some young high school kid develops something in his garage or in his mom's kitchen, and he's some kind of chemistry whiz, and for $5 he puts together some, or even less than that, with rice or sugar or some ordinary household item, bleach or some Tide, something that can kill thousands of people. Should we allow that? Well, no, right? So now that we've established, I'm not a free speech absolutist. Now that we've established that cheap devices that can mass murder people, we shouldn't allow them to view their opinions. And like, is that the threshold, or how do you calibrate that threshold?
I don't know. It's tough. Just the ease of use of having knowledge and then the consequences of the knowledge.
Well, some of the thresholds are calibrated around the fact that if it hurts other people, you shouldn't do it. Which seems to me to be absurd, because people can say anything hurts them or anybody else.
Yeah, like psychological harm versus other kinds of harm.
Which is also interesting, because one of the things you see happen now is people are offended by proxy.
Yeah.
So they're not even offended themselves, they're offended on behalf of someone else who's offended. So the moment that you construct those systems, you're almost designing protective mechanisms to prevent anybody from having an honest conversation, or any conversation at all, because everybody's walking on eggshells and no one will want to say anything. So the question is, how do you undo the damage, the cultural damage we've gotten ourselves into because of the hyper attuned or miscalibrated idea that we need to bow to the sensitivities of everybody else.
Yeah, that's also a big part of Pound the Inquisitor. Is the answer he gives Roush is like, just, you say too bad, you'll live. And that's like the value, that's the norm we should have in a liberal society about psychological harm like that, or just psychological by proxy harm.
Yeah, and if you don't like that response, then what you do is you just manufacture your own body of literature to go against it. As opposed to engaging the idea in its own merit, you basically manufacture what looks like evidence and arguments against something you don't like. And so then nobody needs faith. They just point to these bodies of literature, which are made up whole cloth. And then the problem is then, I mean, it's God, I mean, it's just such an interesting problem that we've literally created a culture in which our thought leaders in the society, the people in the academy, are actively not teaching the other side of the issue and telling people they're better people as a result, and then rooting that in the literature. And that Jim and Helen's book talk about that pretty extensively, where that literature comes from, and epistemic injustice, Miranda Fricker's notion, and problematizing that.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for the book, their new book, and your new book.
It's amazing. Their book is amazing. Yeah, this one's going out September 17th.
Just need to have more conversations.
What else is on your mind?
Not much, really.
Am I a good guest?
You are.
I think I try to be
Appreciate
a
it.
good guest. I'm not.
Very easy.
I try to be. Well, I appreciate it. I could literally never have done this without you, so I appreciate that.
No problem.
And you're doing work. Have you noticed how many people have stopped by and say, "Hey, I see you. I saw your thing. I see you doing this. Really appreciate that. I think that's great."
Yeah.
I wonder. This isn't any kind of ersatz wondering. Like, I really do wonder how many people feel that way, and how many people are radically opposed to what you're doing.
I don't think anyone's radically opposed. It's all been pretty positive. When people sit down and have the conversations here, they feel good.
Well, yeah,
but the people
from
who
those
don't,
people,
yeah. But the people who just walk by probably just ignore me, don't even think about me.
So if you were to say to people, like, this is what this guy does. He has civil conversations and he tries to re-inject civility into an insane a society that's gone berserk. Well, you couldn't phrase it like that, but you have to phrase it some neutral way. Do you think most people would be supportive of that?
I'd say so.
I would think so too.
Yeah.
And I think that the tide is turning. I think so many people are sick of this shit that they're looking to solutions and they're looking to ways to engage this. But what's interesting is that I do think we've lost the culture war on this one.
For now, yeah.
Yeah, for now. But I also think it would, by necessity, it has to turn around the other way.
Yeah, I don't see, the social justice methods ending up anywhere that doesn't end in just disaster.
Yeah, especially when the methods are turned toward subjectivity and feelings and basically creating an architecture of thought around specious ideas. I don't see, and not being willing, capable, or able of defending those ideas from criticism or critique.
Yep. Well, we're working on it.
We'll try. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Sweet.